The brook was not in the vault. That was the first sign that something had gone very wrong. Not a small mistake. Not a paper slip. Not one of those boring palace mix-ups that gets fixed before lunch. This was a piece tied to Queen Elizabeth II, a piece locked away under rules, records, and layers of trust. And yet, according to whispers from inside palace walls, it was suddenly gone from where it should have been. Then things got worse. The earrings, the ones linked to one of the late Queen's most treasured sapphire sets, were said to be sitting on a tray in altered condition. Bent. Changed. No longer the same. What should have been a protected royal heirloom now looked, at least according to this version of events, like something that had been reshaped for convenience. And that is the image people cannot shake, a historic sapphire suite laid out under bright inspection lights, while senior officials stood around it in stunned silence. Let's talk about what really happened, or at least what palace insiders, journalists, and royal watchers say happened behind those closed doors. Because this was never just about jewels, that is what many people outside royal circles do not always understand. A crown jewel is not like a bracelet in a private drawer. It is not there for casual use. These pieces carry memory. They carry rank. They carry the weight of who wore them, when they wore them, and what the country was seeing in that moment. When Queen Elizabeth II stepped out wearing certain sapphires, she was not just dressing for an event. She was sending a message about continuity, tradition, and duty. So when reports began to swirl around the King George VI Victorian sapphire suite, people did not react as if a necklace had gone missing from a dressing room. They reacted as if part of royal history had been disturbed. And perhaps the most shocking part was where the story allegedly led. According to accounts passed around by those said to know the palace system well, the trouble began during what should have been an ordinary inspection. Every few months, heritage assets are reviewed. The process is supposed to be dull. Open the cases, confirm the records, check for damage, reseal the items. Move on. But on this particular occasion, the mood reportedly changed the moment officials reached the section tied most closely to Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection. The sapphire suite stood out immediately. This was no random set. The collection was said to date back to the 1800s and had long been one of the most sentimental pieces associated with the late Queen. It was first given to Princess Elizabeth as a wedding gift in 1947, and over the decades, it became part of the visual story of her reign. People had seen those stones in state portraits, public appearances, major ceremonies. The sapphires were not just blue gems. They were part of the Queen's image. That is why the damage hit so hard. According to the story making the rounds, the square sapphire earrings had been modified. Not cleaned, not repaired, modified. The original settings were said to have been forced and changed so they could be worn as clip-ons. Why? Because Camilla, in this version of the story, did not have pierced ears. Now pause there for a second. Because that one detail changed the whole tone of the scandal. If true, this was no longer about a technical adjustment done by approved hands under careful rules. It became a story about an old royal object being reshaped for personal comfort. For palace traditionalists, that was not styling. That was sacrilege. And still, that was only one layer. As the inspection continued, more items were reportedly found missing from their assigned places. A brooch. A pearl necklace. And then, most explosive of all, 2 handwritten lockdown journals said to contain Queen Elizabeth II's private thoughts during the pandemic years. That is when the story stopped being about jewels alone. Because missing jewelry creates one kind of panic. Missing private writings create another. According to whispers tied to the palace, those journals were meant to stay sealed until the year 2122. Not next year. Not after a memoir deal. Not after a king dies. a full century of silence. That kind of seal tells you everything about how sensitive those pages were believed to be. So now imagine the scene: a quiet vault, senior staff checking cases, a growing list of missing pieces, no broken locks, no outside break-in, no smashed glass, no alarm, just absence. That meant the threat, if there was one, had likely come from inside. And that is where the story turned from shocking to chilling. Accounts from insiders say security logs showed a late-night opening of the vault. Not by a thief climbing through a window, but by a palace guard acting on internal instructions. When the trail was reportedly followed backward, it pointed toward Queen Camilla's private residential wing. Then came the detail that sent the whole thing into overdrive. A staff member cleaning her private room allegedly found the sapphire jubilee brooch hidden in a false-bottom jewelry box. Not misplaced. Not borrowed, and forgotten. Hidden. That was the moment, according to this palace version, when confusion became suspicion. And once suspicion entered the room, nothing looked the same anymore. King Charles III was said to be handling a major diplomatic meeting at the time, receiving a high-level delegation from Nigeria. Out in public, he remained calm, smiling, speaking about trade, security, partnership. The perfect royal mask. But behind the scenes, the air inside Buckingham Palace was said to be turning icy. Because if the reports were true, then the king was not dealing with a simple household issue. He was dealing with damage to his late mother's treasured heirlooms. He was dealing with missing private writings. And he was dealing with the possibility that the person at the center of it was his own wife. That is the part that gives this story its bite. Not just the jewels, not just the secrecy, but the fact that the whole thing, as whispered by those who claim to know, was unfolding inside a marriage that had already carried years of public judgment, private loyalty, and careful image repair. So yes, people were staring at the earrings. Yes, they were asking about the brooch. Yes, they were wondering what was in those journals. But under all of that sat a much bigger question. What happens when the person meant to guard the image of the crown is accused of crossing a line with the crown's own history? And if that sounds dramatic, wait until we get to what many say happened in the room once Charles finally closed the door and demanded answers. Because the sapphires were only the start. To understand why this story spread so fast, you have to understand the people at the center of it. Royal life is built on image, but it runs on rules. That is the part outsiders miss all the time. People see tiaras, carriages, smiling balcony waves, and glittering state dinners. What they do not see is the long chain of rules behind every object, every room, every title, every appearance. Inside that world, ownership is not always ownership. Access is not the same as control. A jewel may be worn by one royal and still belong to history, the crown, or the nation. Queen Elizabeth II understood that better than almost anyone. She was not seen as careless with tradition. If anything, she was known for holding tight to it. She treated royal objects, old rituals, and inherited duties as things passed down in trust, not things to be bent around mood or preference. That is why her personal collection carried such emotional force. When she wore something often, people noticed. When she put something away, people noticed that too. And among those pieces, the sapphire suite stood in a special place. It had history. It had family meaning. It had presence. The necklace, the earrings, later additions like the tiara and bracelet, together they told a story of marriage, monarchy, and memory. These were not just lovely blue stones in old settings. They were tied to Elizabeth as daughter, bride, queen, widow, symbol. That is why even people who do not care much about jewelry still react when these pieces are mentioned. They feel loaded. Now place Camilla into that picture. For years, her role inside the royal family came with tension. That is no secret. Public opinion around her was complicated from the start, and it took a very long time for her image to soften. There were years when she was treated like an outsider. Years when every step she took was measured against the memory of Diana. Years when her very presence near Charles was enough to stir anger. But time passed. Images changed. Careful public work helped. And gradually, she began to look less like a scandal and more like a settled part of the institution. She was polished, controlled, better received than before. By the time Charles became king, many people believed the hardest chapter of that story was behind them. That is what made these allegations so damaging, because they did not paint a picture of a careful consort protecting tradition. They painted the opposite. They painted someone treating deeply symbolic objects as if proximity to power gave permission. What many people don't know is that these kinds of royal tensions do not usually arrive out of nowhere. Stories like this gain force when they seem to fit older whispers. And according to society insiders, there had long been quiet discomfort in some royal circles over how Queen Elizabeth II's legacy would be handled after her death. Who would wear what? Who would be trusted with which pieces? Which objects were strictly ceremonial and which were still emotionally charged? Those questions mattered because Elizabeth was not just a queen. She was the queen for most people alive. Her objects were not leftovers. They were almost sacred in public memory. So when rumors began to spread that Camilla had been allowed to wear some of those pieces as tribute, people accepted it on the surface. That made sense. The passing of jewels from one generation to the next is part of royal theater. But under that polite surface, some were already wondering where the line sat. Borrowing is one thing. Changing is another. And if the palace story is to be believed, there were warning signs before the audit ever happened. Whispers say some staff had privately noticed unusual movement around certain stored items. Small things. Delays in logging. Requests made through the wrong channels. A sense that objects connected to Elizabeth's personal history were being handled with more informality than some expected. Nothing explosive on its own, but enough to make careful people uneasy. That is how these stories grow. First, one person notices a detail. Then someone else notices a pattern. Then everybody realizes they may have been looking at the same problem from different corners. There were also said to be concerns around privacy, especially about the late Queen's papers and handwritten materials. Elizabeth belonged to a generation that wrote things down. Notes, letters, reflections. And during the lockdown years, according to this account, she may have written more than usual. The idea that private journals existed was already enough to make insiders nervous. The idea that someone might want access to them made people even more uneasy. Because private writings can outlive careful public messaging. They can change how history is told. They can reveal doubt where the public saw certainty. They can expose tensions the palace spent years smoothing over. So if the journals were truly sealed until 2122, that tells you the family believed those pages had weight. Real weight. And then came another detail that made the whole thing darker. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that the vault itself showed no signs of outside tampering. No forced locks. No dramatic break-in. No movie-style thief. That meant the route in was legitimate. Someone with authority, or someone acting under authority, had touched what should not have been touched. That is the kind of thing palace systems are built to prevent. But those same systems also depend on rank. They depend on people obeying the voices above them. If a command appears to come from the right place, staff may move before they question. That is why the report of a late-night call matters so much in this story. According to the version being whispered, a guard with family financial pressure was contacted through internal palace channels and persuaded to move certain protected items quietly under the idea of preservation. That word matters too. Preservation sounds noble, preservation sounds careful, preservation sounds like duty. But if that language was used to bypass process, then it was not preservation at all. It was cover. And suddenly the whole picture changed. This was no longer a story about bad judgment. It became a story about authority being used in the shadows. People inside royal life know the most dangerous acts are rarely loud. They happen in calm voices, through correct doors, with the right titles attached. That is why this scandal, if true, felt so believable to so many. Not because it was wild, but because it was quiet. Too quiet. Then came the moment that turned palace concern into family crisis. The missing pieces were one thing. The altered earrings were another. But once the journals entered the picture, it became personal in a way that money could not explain. Because a damaged jewel wounds history. A touched journal wounds memory, and memory in royal life is power. On that particular occasion, the palace was said to feel split in two. Up front, everything looked normal. King Charles III stood in polished rooms greeting a Nigerian delegation, speaking in that calm public voice royals use when the whole machine must appear steady. Cameras flashed. Hands were shaken. Trade and security were discussed. The image was neat, measured, controlled. Behind closed doors, people were said to be moving fast, not running. That would be too obvious. But moving with that clipped, cold speed that tells you something serious has landed. The tray with the sapphire suite had reportedly been taken for closer examination. Heritage specialists, royal appraisers, and senior officials looked over the pieces under strong light. The necklace still carried its old grandeur. The blue stones still caught the eye. But the earrings were another matter. Accounts from insiders say the damage was visible. The fine work around the fittings no longer looked untouched. The original posts had allegedly been removed. In their place sat modern clip mechanisms. There were claims of bent metal, filing marks, a break in the old structure that could not simply be wished away. One expert, according to this version of events, compared it to painting over an old master. That is how deep the insult felt. Because in royal terms, these earrings were not fashion pieces. They were part of a line reaching backward through family history. And now, under bright inspection lamps, that line looked broken. This was the moment the scandal stopped being abstract. People were no longer talking about rumor. They were staring at physical change. Then the second wave hit. Security tracing. Item movement records, late-night access logs. The palace does not run on guesswork when something serious happens. Everything leaves a trail if people look hard enough. And according to the story circulating among royal watchers, that trail led to a guard who had opened the vault after hours on internal instruction. When questioned, the explanation was reportedly simple. He believed he was acting under approved authority. He had received a call. The request came through palace lines. The task was framed as discreet and necessary. But once officials traced the origin of that call, the air reportedly changed again. It led back toward Camilla's private wing. Now imagine the pressure building in that moment. A damaged sapphire suite. Missing items. A staff discovery of a brooch hidden in a false compartment. A paper trail leading inward, not outward. By then, this was no longer something that could be handled with quiet rearranging and a polite memo. Too many people had seen too much. That is when the emergency meeting was said to be called. The room, according to those familiar with the account, included King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Queen Camilla. No crowd. No advisors filling every chair, just the people who mattered most to what came next. And people say Charles entered that room in a very particular mood. Not shouting. That would almost have been easier. He was said to be cold. Still. Controlled in the way people get when they are past public embarrassment and into private hurt. The tray was there. The earrings were there. The question by then was unavoidable. How had a piece of royal history ended up altered, and how had another ended up hidden in a bedroom compartment? Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that Camilla did not begin with apology. Instead, she reportedly defended herself through position. As queen consort, she argued she had been using the pieces in service of the monarchy. The adjustment to the earrings was presented as practical, even respectful. Better to wear them than leave them unused. It was not enough. Charles, according to the story, pushed back at once. These were not personal accessories, they were crown assets. Protected, recorded, governed by rules. No change to an heirloom of that level should happen without expert review and formal approval. That part matters. Because once the defense of convenience failed, the focus shifted to the journals. And this is where the room reportedly turned truly brutal. Prince William is said to have spoken sharply, drawing attention away from the jewelry and toward the sealed writings of his grandmother. If the earrings were a violation of heritage, the journals were a violation of trust. Why had they been moved? Why had a guard been involved in the middle of the night? Why were protected papers sitting outside their chain of custody? Those are not soft questions. Those are questions asked by someone who already believes the answers will be bad. Then came the alleged admission. According to this palace version, Camilla did not deny taking the journals. Instead, she insisted she had done it for protection. For Charles. For the monarchy. For the future. That is the twist that gave this story its darker edge. Because now, the motive was no longer vanity alone. It became control over legacy. She was said to have claimed that during the loneliness of the pandemic years, Queen Elizabeth II had written private reflections that could cause serious trouble if ever made public. Doubts about the family. Pain over internal fractures. Worries about succession. Even concerns, according to the rumor, about whether Charles was fully ready for the burden of the throne. If pages like that existed, you can see why they would terrify people close to the center of power. Not because private doubt is unusual, but because royal systems depend on the image of certainty. So the defense, as told in whispers, went like this: the journals were taken not to steal them, but to shape what history would one day see. Remove certain pages. Protect the king. Protect the institution. Prevent a future crisis. That argument did not save her. If anything, it made things worse. Because to the people in that room, according to the story, she had crossed into a role no one had given her. She was no longer acting like a consort. She was acting like a gatekeeper of truth. And Princess Anne, if the reports are right, cut through the room with the hardest line of all. You do not protect the crown by breaking its rules. That is one of those sentences that lands like stone. Not loud, not fancy, just final. The meeting had started as a confrontation over objects. By now, it had become a judgment on character. Charles had in front of him the altered sapphires, which allegedly showed damage done for private use. He had the story of the hidden brooch. He had the trail leading to the journals. And he had, in this account, a confession shaped as justification. That combination changed everything. Because once someone claims the right to edit history for the good of the monarchy starts seeing them as a threat. And according to accounts from witnesses and insiders, Charles's answer was not emotional. It was institutional. He reportedly ordered a forensic review of every heritage piece Camilla had handled. Her access to the vaults was revoked immediately. Formal sanctions began to take shape that very day. Outside, the public still knew nothing. Inside, a queen consort's standing was said to be collapsing by the hour. The full truth, or at least the full palace version of it, was still to come. But one thing was already clear. The marriage may have remained in the room, but the monarch had taken over. Once the palace machine started moving, the story became harder to contain. That is usually how these things go. First there is silence, Then there are tiny signs. Then one missing name, one cancelled event, one strange shift in routine, and suddenly, everybody knows something is wrong even if no one says it plainly. That is what reportedly happened here. Soon after the confrontation, Camilla's public schedule was said to begin disappearing. Engagements were wiped from the court calendar. Patronages received formal notices. Meetings were reassigned. Her name, once regular in the royal record, became strangely absent. People noticed. Royal watchers always notice. And social media noticed even faster. Where is Camilla? Why are her appearances gone? Why has the palace gone so quiet? Then came a brief palace statement, cold and careful, confirming that a major heritage item had undergone an unauthorized structural change and had been returned for restoration. No dramatic naming, no emotional language, no open family war. But palace language does not need to shout. It signals. And many are questioning how much more was happening behind those polished words. Because by then, the rumors had already spread well past the earrings. People were talking about the brooch, the journals, the late-night call, the supposed discovery in the false-bottom jewelry box, the idea that one of the late queen's most symbolic sapphire pieces had been altered for comfort struck people hard. But the idea that private writings had been moved and possibly reviewed struck even harder. Jewels are visible. Journals are intimate. That is why the second half of the story carried so much force. According to insiders, the journals were recovered and resealed under a far tighter security system than before. A dual-key protocol was allegedly introduced, with access divided between King Charles III and Prince William. That detail may be one of the most telling in the whole story, because it sends a message. It says trust had narrowed. It says the king no longer believed private royal memory could sit near everyone equally. It says a line had been drawn. In this version of events, Charles chose the chain of succession over the woman standing beside him. And then there were the sanctions. Accounts from society insiders say Charles moved with ruthless speed. Camilla was reportedly stripped of honorary military roles. Public duties were suspended. Heritage assets tied to the late queen were seized back into crown custody. Most dramatically of all, she was said to be removed from Buckingham Palace and sent to Ray Mill House in Wiltshire under an indefinite arrangement. If true, that is not just a cooling-off period. That is exile in royal language. Not loud exile. Not medieval exile. Modern exile, the kind that comes with shut gates, reassigned duties, and a vanishing public role. It is neat. It is quiet. And it leaves very little for the person at the center of it to hold on to besides title. That image, a ghost consort, still present in name but cut off from real function, is one of the reasons this story has stuck so strongly in public imagination, because it feels cold enough to be royal. But there was another layer unfolding in private, far away from cameras. The Restoration Review. According to the alleged goldsmith's report, the damage to the sapphire earrings was serious, not cosmetic. Not an easy switch back. Heritage experts were said to have found signs of high-heat alteration, contamination from a lower-grade gold alloy, and fractures around the old craftsmanship. If that report is accurate, then the object itself was changed forever. That matters more than most people realize. In elite preservation circles, once a piece is marked as modified, it carries that mark permanently. Even if repaired. Even if made beautiful again. It is no longer untouched. The story of the object has changed. That may be the saddest part of all, because in this version of the tale, a wedding gift that had traveled through generations, state occasions, portraits, and memory was damaged not by war, theft, or time, but by a decision made inside the palace itself. And once Charles understood that, according to the whispers, He did not just punish. He rewrote the rules. That is where the story gets almost more chilling than dramatic. Reports say a new internal protection system was drawn up for all royal heritage items. Mandatory audits, strict anti-modification rules, no cleaning, resizing, repair, or adjustment by anyone except official crown specialists, clear legal separation between personal use and custodianship. Even stronger rules around Queen Elizabeth II's personal effects. If so, then Camilla did not just face fallout. She became the reason for a palace precedent. That kind of thing lasts. It gets remembered in policy, not just gossip. And then we come back to the journals, the darkest thread of all. What was in them? That is the question hanging over every version of this story. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal a cloud of rumor around those pages. Some say they held private reflections on the family during the lockdown years. Others claim they contained painful thoughts about Harry and Meghan, written not as monarch to subjects, but as grandmother to family. Some whispers go further, suggesting the late Queen wrote about Charles, succession, Camilla's role, and the strain inside the institution. No one outside that sealed circle can prove those claims. Maybe the pages contain nothing explosive at all. Maybe they hold only grief, loneliness, and the thoughts of an old woman cut off from normal life during a strange time in history. But the fact that so many people believe they could shake the monarchy tells you how much symbolic power they now hold. Sometimes a sealed document becomes more dangerous than an open one, because imagination fills the gaps. And imagination can be brutal. Public reaction, once the signs became impossible to ignore, followed the usual pattern of royal scandal: shock, mockery, outrage, endless debate. Some said Charles had done the right thing by putting institution above emotion. Others thought the whole story, if true, showed a family so consumed by control that it would rather bury truth than face it. Some focused on Camilla. Others focused on the monarchy itself. That is why scandals like this never stay small. They stop being about one person. They turn into a mirror. People look at them and see whatever they already believe about power, class, secrecy, loyalty, and image. And this story, more than most, offers plenty to look at. A king torn between marriage and duty. A consort accused of overstepping into history itself. A dead queen whose silence may hold more force than the voices of the living. A damaged sapphire suite. A hidden brooch. A sealed journal. A false bottom box. A late-night call. It reads like fiction. That is exactly why so many people keep repeating it. And yet, beneath the drama, there is something sadly human here. Fear. Fear of what the past might say. Fear of what private words might do to a public crown. Fear of being judged by history before history is ready to speak. If this palace version is even partly true, then what happened was not just a scandal over jewels, it was a fight over memory. Who gets to guard it? Who gets to shape it? Who gets shut out of it? And if it is only rumor, it still tells us something real about how people see royalty now. Not as distant gods in silk and gold, but as fragile people trapped inside an old system, trying to control the story before the story controls them. These stories provide insight into a simple truth. In royal life, the most dangerous thing in the room is often not the crown, not the jewel, not even the scandal. It is the record. Because once history is written down, someone will always be tempted to touch it. And that temptation, more than anything, is what seems to haunt this entire sapphire story.